Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today, we are tackling a topic that, well, it rarely gets the fanfare it deserves, but honestly, without it, no modern military operation could last a single day. We're talking about the immense, foundational, and often kind of invisible system of military sustainment. We're really wrestling with the sheer, monumental scale of sustaining global military operations.
It's true. When people think about power projection, their minds go straight to the hardware, the jets, the ships, the tanks. But the real story, the determinant of success operationally, it's always logistics. Our sources today, they range from critical doctrine like Field Manual 4.0, sustainment operations, to pretty stark strategic guidance in the National Defense Industrial Strategy interim report. And they all show us that sustainment it's far more than just moving boxes around.
Right, and that's exactly where we need to start. Sustainment isn't just support, it's the core enabling function.
Yeah.
As Field Manual 3.0's quite clearly, it is central to generating and applying combat power. And critically, it determines the limits, the depth, and endurance of any operation.
Yeah, exactly. So our mission in this deep dive really is to give you, the listener, a clear sort of contextual understanding of this entire system. We need to connect the national economy, the factory floor, all the way to the forward battle line. And crucially, understand the massive shifts required now that the military has to assume it's operating in a highly contested logistics environment.
So we're linking the National Industrial Strategy, the very foundation of capacity, to the very real tactical challenges that forces face today. Understanding this whole pipeline and the huge scale of reform that's underway, well, it's fundamental if you want to grasp the realities of large-scale combat operations.
Okay, so to start, we really have to establish what doctrine defines as the sustainment warfighting function. It's a holistic approach,
Wow.
maintaining the entire force, ensuring its health, its fighting strength, its readiness.
So it's much broader than just, supply and transport, and that seems to be the common perception. What exactly are the four pillars that define this warfighting function in the Army?
That's right. People usually focus on the physical stuff, but the function itself, it's divided into four distinct critical areas. First is logistics. Okay, that's the physical movement, provision of material, the stuff people think of. But then we also have personnel support. That covers everything from replacement management to mail services, even morale, welfare, and recreation programs.
Okay.
Third, there's finance and controller. This lets commanders maintain fiscal responsibility, manage currency, and importantly, rapidly initiate operational contract support.
Interesting.
And finally, medical service support. That's casualty care, evacuation, medical logistics, the whole health piece.
The integration of finance and controller is fascinating. It effectively turns an economic function into, well, a forward combat multiplier. By having that capability embedded, a commander can quickly get critical operational contract support going, which, as you know, is often essential for things like specialized engineering or niche transport overseas.
Precisely, yeah. And within that first pillar, logistics, the complexity just increases even further. Doctrine breaks logistics down into 7 essential elements, and all of them have to be synchronized.
Okay, let's maybe list those out. Give them a bit of definition so we're all on the same page.
Sure, they are. Maintenance, pretty straightforward, keeping equipment working. Transportation, moving people and material. Supply, providing the necessary items. Then field services, these are essential services, think laundry, showers, religious support. Distribution, the system that moves and delivers supplies. Operational contract support, which we mentioned using civilian capabilities. And general engineering, providing mobility, counter-mobility, survivability works. So when leaders talk about integrating sustainment, they're talking about synchronizing those 7 diverse elements seamlessly with the whole operational plan.
Okay, so if that's the structure, what are the effects this structure is supposed to produce? Our sources point to this powerful trio of contributions that actually enable commanders to fight and sort of define the limits of that fight.
Right, this power trio is foundational. Freedom of action, operational reach, and endurance. Freedom of action is maybe the most immediate benefit. It means enabling commanders to achieve operational initiative, maintain the tempo of the fight. If a commander doesn't have to constantly worry about running out of fuel for maneuver or ammo for fire support, they can operate much more freely. Effective, responsive sustainment, that's what prevents the enemy from dictating your movements.
And operational reach, that seems to define the very boundaries of the conflict itself.
It absolutely does. Joint Publication 3.0 defines operational reach as the distance and duration across which a force can successfully employ its military capabilities. This is really where the rubber meets the road. Sustainment assessments, they are what define these
Oh.
limits. If you can't resupply a force 500 kilometers out because, say, the airspace is contested or the roads aren't suitable, well, then your operational reach basically ends at 499 kilometers. Staffs have to continuously analyze, available sustainment, the range of their capabilities, and the intelligence estimates of the enemy to really understand where the operation might just have to stop or where the risk becomes unacceptable.
So sustainment really is the primary constraint on maneuver in many ways. And finally, endurance.
Endurance, yeah. That's the force's ability to persevere over time.
Yep.
Throughout the depth of an operational environment, large-scale combat operations put a significant sustained strain on the entire national system. Endurance is the ability to handle mass casualties, manage the massive volume of supplies needed over long periods, we could be talking months or even longer, and the ability to keep pushing forward even after taking heavy losses. Without endurance, even a brilliant tactical victory can become strategically meaningless pretty quickly.
Planning for this level of complexity, it obviously requires sophisticated tools. And our sources introduce a very practical mnemonic for developing a logistics running estimate, basically, a continuously updated assessment of the situation. It's known as DRA-CMS to the ER.
Yeah, this framework, it's not technically doctrine, but it's incredibly useful. It ensures planners follow the necessary integrated steps when they're generating their estimates. It kind of encapsulates the 4 core planning phases you need for that running estimate process. Determine requirements, assess capabilities, mitigate shortfalls, and estimate risk.
Okay, let's break down that sequence. First,
Yeah.
you determine requirements. What supplies, services, transportation do you actually need to achieve the commander's mission?
Exactly. And developing these requirements, it's explicitly called out as an integrated staff process. It cannot be left solely to the sustainers. While calculating basic stuff like rations and fuel might seem straightforward, calculating, say, artillery ammo consumption or specialized engineering materials or medevac needs,
Yeah.
that absolutely has to be done with the fire support folks, the engineers, the medical specialists. And these requirements, they get calculated in specific units of time or maybe by phase, depending on the operational logic.
Okay, so once the requirements are determined, the staff has to assess capabilities. This is where the art comes in, I imagine. It's not just counting trucks, right? It's assessing their readiness, the available aircraft, the security of the routes, the health of the personnel. What do we actually have and what condition is it in?
Precisely. And that leads directly to the next step. Mitigate shortfalls. If your requirements exceed what you actually have available, how do you close that gap? Do you ask for prioritization from higher ups? Do you look at using host nation support? Do you initiate operational contract support? This step demands some creative problem solving, leveraging assets across the entire joint force, really.
And finally, you estimate risk. What happens if those mitigations fail? What if the enemy successfully targets your supply line? Or maybe a key port is denied? This forces the staff to clearly define the level of risk they're asking the commander to accept.
And that risk estimation is absolutely crucial. Leaders at all levels, all echelons, they have to understand the economy of effort achieved through this integration. And they must be prepared to accept risk, prioritize requirements, balance resources, all in support of these large-scale combat operations. It's a continuous process. It never really ends throughout the fight.
Okay, that discussion really sets the stage for the massive scale of the strategic foundation that underpins all of this. Let's move now from those tactical planning tools to the national engine that makes it all possible. This intersection of the national economy and the military instrument of power.
Yeah, this connection, the link between the battlefield and the factory floor, that's what defines strategic sustainment. There's a classic quote from Rear Admiral Henry Eccles that just captures it perfectly. He said, "Logistics is the bridge between the economy of the nation and the tactical operations of its own combat forces."
That's a powerful visual. It really places sustainment squarely at the intersection of the economic and military instruments of power, what strategists often refer to as the DIME construct: diplomatic, informational, military, economic.
Absolutely. Success on the ground is directly tied to the health and the capabilities of the factories and the supply chains back home. As a Defense Munitions Board presentation noted way back in 1947, the logistic process is, and I quote, "at one and the same time, the military element in the nation's economy and the economic element in its military operations. They are utterly inseparable."
And to manage this vast connection, we use the concept of the strategic support area. This area is immense, right? It spans continents.
Yeah, the strategic support area isn't really a physical boundary like a line on a map. It's more of a doctrinal description. It covers the entire area extending from the theater of operations all the way back to a base in the United States, or maybe another friendly combatant commander's area of responsibility. It includes the major air and seaports, the logistics hubs, the entire infrastructure supporting the flow of forces and sustainment. It's huge.
And within that huge strategic support area, the doctrine identifies four sort of interlocking segments of the strategic base that we rely upon. These four segments are essentially the fundamental source of our military strength.
That's right, they are. The national economy, just the overall wealth and productivity of the country. Then the national security industrial base. That's the full spectrum of companies, big and small, that contribute to national security in any way. Then a subset of that is the defense industrial base, usually called the DIB. That's specifically focused on providing the Department of Defense with materials, products, and services. And finally, the Organic Industrial Base, or OIB. These are the government-owned and operated facilities. Think depots, arsenals, manufacturing plants.
That distinction between the defense industrial base and the organic industrial base seems really critical. The DIB is a private sector driven by profit, commercial innovation, while the OIB is that critical government-run infrastructure that maintains, repairs, and provides maybe specialized low-volume military production.
That's absolutely key, yes. The health of the entire industrial ecosystem really hinges on the ability to translate commercial innovation from that broader national security industrial base into deployable military capabilities, produced by the defense industrial base, and then sustained over the long haul by the government's own organic industrial base. It's a nested, interdependent system. You need all the pieces working together.
Okay, now let's look at the Joint Sustainment Enterprise, the major organizations responsible for providing this strategic support across the globe. We have three real heavy hitters here responsible for the physical reality of that strategic support area. Let's start with United States Transportation Command.
United States Transportation Command, or USTRANSCOM, they are the mobility joint force provider. Their role is just monumental. They plan, resource, and operate the entire worldwide defense transportation system. They're responsible for inter-theater distribution moving stuff between continents, between theaters, and they also handle global patient movement.
That's a staggering responsibility. When we talk about moving, say, a brigade combat team or even an entire division from the U.S. across the Atlantic or Pacific, that's U.S. Transportation Command coordinating the ships, the planes, the whole sequence of movement.
Exactly. Just think about the sheer complexity of moving a single brigade combat team today. You're coordinating thousands of pieces of equipment, making sure they arrive at multiple seaports, loading them onto military sea lift ships or maybe commercial vessels, traversing potentially contested waters, and then finally coordinating their reception in the theater. U.S. Transportation Command coordinates all those movement requirements with the combatant commanders, and they have to rely heavily on both military assets and commercial partners to maximize capabilities, often on extremely tight timelines.
Okay, next up is the Defense Logistics Agency. They sound like the colossal logistics combat support agency for the nation.
That's a pretty accurate description. The Defense Logistics Agency, or DLA, is the nation's logistics combat support agency. They manage the global supply chain. Essentially, they act as the Department of Defense's massive global inventory manager. They provide logistics advice, and critically, they serve as the Department of Defense executive agent for several essential classes of supply.
And which classes of supply does the Defense Logistics Agency specifically manage?
They manage the vast majority of common supplies, things like Class 1, which is subsistence food and water, Class 4, construction and barrier material, and Class 8A, which is medical material. So this means they're directing a global network of distribution centers to make sure that forces, wherever they are in the world, have everything from, frozen meals to life-saving pharmaceuticals to raw lumber for building fortifications.
And finally, integrating a lot of this for the Army specifically is the Army Materiel Command.
Right. The Army Materiel Command, or AMC, is really key to Army readiness, particularly in overseeing the strategic support area's infrastructure, the Army's part of it. They oversee the readiness of our installations, depots, arsenals, ammunition plants, logistics support areas. They are the Army's lead material integrator. They provide national-level sustainment, acquisition integration, contracting support. Their capabilities are incredibly diverse. They extend from maintaining the facilities that actually build munitions all the way down to providing forward support maintenance teams right in a combat theater.
Okay, so now we transition from how the system is structured to why it needs, a massive overhaul right now. This brings us squarely to the National Defense Industrial Strategy. And the context for this strategy is pretty stark. Increasing coercive actions by the People's Republic of China, the Russian Federation's invasion of Ukraine, it all demonstrates the imperative for increased and improved defense capabilities. Urgently.
Yeah, this strategy is an essential acknowledgement that the entire industrial ecosystem must be fully aligned with the 2022 National Defense Strategy. The United States basically has to rebuild its capacity for volume production. It's that simple and that complex. And a central strategic problem driving this whole strategy is the recognition that innovation, it's now primarily driven by the private sector for commercial markets. It's not really driven by government research and development like it perhaps used to be.
That's a huge shift.
Yeah.
It means the military can no longer just invent exactly what it needs and then build it in-house, so to speak. It has to figure out how to access, how to utilize, how to guide commercial innovations, which often move far, far faster than the government acquisition system can keep up with.
Exactly. That challenge really underlies the entire strategy. So the National Defense Industrial Strategy breaks down 4 critical priorities for modernizing this ecosystem. Let's start with priority 1, resilient supply chains.
What does resilience mean here? Is it more than just having a backup supplier?
It's much more. The goal is for the defense industrial base to securely produce products, services, technologies at speed, at scale, and at cost. Resilience means reducing dependence on single suppliers, yes, but especially those located in adversarial or potentially adversarial nations. And this requires direct investment. You have to proactively expand domestic production capacity for key materials.
Our sources give some really good, specific examples of this kind of proactive investment, especially in critical minerals.
They do. For instance, back in May 2024, the Department of Defense awarded $20 million in Defense Production Act funds to a company called South 32. It was for their Hermosa project down in Arizona. This investment is crucial because it's aimed at delivering domestic battery-grade manganese, which is essential for all sorts of military and civilian batteries, supposedly 2 years earlier than planned.
Wow.
And they also invested in Canadian companies like Fortune Minerals Limited and Lemigo Metals Incorporated. That was to build resilience in cobalt and graphite supply chains, supporting the U.S.-Canadian Joint Action Plan on critical minerals.
So these specific investments show the U.S. isn't just focused on the final weapon system, the tank or the missile. They're looking right down to the raw materials needed to power the modern fight. And related to scaling that production, they established a dedicated cell focused entirely on speeding things up.
That's the Joint Production Accelerator Cell, or JPAC. It actually succeeded the earlier Munitions Industrial Deep Dive Initiative. It's designed as a tactical problem-solving cell, focused on building surge capacity, scaling production, and leveraging new techniques like advanced manufacturing, digital engineering. And their success has apparently already been measurable. They've contributed to over $2 billion in investments across the weapons industrial base just to ramp up production capacity.
Okay, moving to priority 2. Workforce readiness. This seems critical. You can invest billions in facilities, but they're useless without skilled people to run them. The strategy notes a distinct crisis here: the need to aggressively renew interest in industrial and skilled trade jobs.
This is perhaps the most existential long-term challenge they face. It really is. Just consider the submarine industrial base. Because of decades of defense spending contraction, the so-called peace dividend, followed now by a critical and very aggressive plan to modernize the nuclear submarine fleets. The industry is struggling just to maintain a skilled workforce. The gap is staggering. Over the next 10 years, the submarine industrial base alone needs to hire nearly 100,000 trained workers, just at the primary construction yards.
100,000.
100,000, plus another 17,000 people at the vendors supporting the complex supply chain.
That is a huge number. 100,000 specialized workers.
Yep.
What's the single biggest bottleneck here? Is it recruiting young people into these trade skills, or is it retaining the expertise they already have?
It's really a dual problem, but the core issue seems to be the pipeline for those specialized trade skills, getting new people in and trained up. So they're trying to address this by expanding investment in programs like America's Cutting Edge and the Manufacturing Innovation Institutes. These institutes offer guidance, workforce development, trying to create pipelines for occupations in advanced manufacturing and, science, technology, engineering, and mathematics, the STEM fields. The goal isn't just to hire bodies, but to build a skilled workforce that is sufficiently staffed, diverse, and, importantly, representative of the nation.
Okay. Priority 3 addresses flexible acquisition and the modernization of that organic industrial base we talked about. The report specifically warns against the risk of inappropriately customized systems. What does that mean?
That risk is driven by having excessive bespoke requirements. Requirements that are so unique they lead to systems that might have lower battlefield utility in the end, and are also far more expensive and much more difficult to maintain over their life cycle. So the strategy calls for finding an intelligent balance between customization, which you need to address specific mission needs, and standardization.
And standardization in this context means agreeing on uniform engineering criteria, which then allows for economies of scale.
Precisely. It allows for higher volume production, lower cost per unit, and it enables the use of commercial off-the-shelf solutions, COTS, where it's reasonable and applicable. The push is to maximize the use of commercial technology wherever possible to reduce costs and complexity.
And what about the physical infrastructure of the organic industrial base itself? Those depots and arsenals run directly by the military.
Yeah, many of these critical OIB facilities are, well, they're historical. Many date back to World War II or even earlier. They often operate with obsolete equipment, which obviously impacts their cycle times, their overall capacity. So the Army is preparing a significant investment plan, about $4.5 billion over the next 15 years, just to modernize its organic industrial base capabilities. When you look at industrial parks that have literally been operational since before Pearl Harbor, the sheer scale of the legacy infrastructure we're trying to modernize, it's kind of a unique American problem that requires sustained resources over a long time.
Okay, finally, priority 4, economic deterrence. This seems to focus on leveraging market mechanisms among allies and partners to protect the whole system.
Right. Economic deterrence is about using fair and effective market mechanisms to protect the industrial ecosystem and ensure smooth cooperation with allies. A key mechanism here is establishing security of supply arrangements, or SOSAs. These are formal agreements. They allow the United States and foreign partners to request priority delivery of defense-critical components from each other's industrial bases, basically ensuring that a crisis in one country doesn't halt production in another allied country. Mutual support.
So it's kind of like mutual insurance within the global defense market. And what are the risks they're trying to mitigate here regarding adversarial behavior?
Well, the Department of Defense is intensely focused on strengthening enforcement against things like adversarial ownership of critical companies and cyber attacks. They're using authorities like the International Traffic and Arms Regulations, ITAR, and the Export Administration Regulations, EAR, because if the United States appears unwilling or maybe unable to protect its critical industries and its intellectual property, it risks alienating allies, it impacts foreign defense sales, and ultimately it leads to a loss of trust that profoundly weakens deterrence against our peer competitors.
Okay, so we've established the National Strategic Foundation and the billions being invested to build speed and endurance into the industrial ecosystem. But all that investment, all that effort, it's ultimately meaningless if the supplies can't actually get from the factory to the front line. Which brings us to the operational reality facing forces today, the contested logistics environment. This is really where high-level strategy meets, well, brutal tactical reality.
It really is the ultimate game changer for sustainment planning. It changes everything. Field Manual 4.0 defines a contested logistics environment, and it cites the U.S. Code, specifically 10 United States Code Section 2926 as an environment where an adversary actively targets logistics operations, facilities, and activities across all domains: land, air, sea, space, cyberspace, and the electromagnetic spectrum. Everywhere.
So what's the foundational assumption that every commander, every logistician has to make now in this kind of environment?
The operational assumption, according to doctrine, is stark. Sustainment forces must assume they are always under observation, always in contact, and always contested. Peer adversaries possess the capability and the capacity to observe, disrupt, delay, and attack United States forces' infrastructure operations. Whether they are still in the United States, deployed abroad, or even just in transit between locations, there's effectively no safe sanctuary anymore.
And what does this multi-domain threat look like specifically when it's aimed at logistics? It's not just bombs hitting depots, is it?
No, far from it. The threat is persistent and it's pervasive. It includes peer adversaries deploying persistent visual surveillance, often using highly advanced space-based or airborne capabilities to detect and target logistics operations, which tend to concentrate in predictable patterns. They also use sophisticated cyberspace capabilities to persistently probe and disrupt logistics operations. They can influence and deny movement by crippling command and control systems.
And the threat even targets the people who rely on the system.
Absolutely. Logistics operations are subject to adversary influence operations. Think disinformation, misinformation campaigns, targeting soldiers, targeting their families, their friends, all designed to erode trust in the sustainment chain itself. Furthermore, our reliance on civilian infrastructure, things like host nation support, operational contract support, that's highly vulnerable to pure adversary influence and attack, it complicates the entire logistical chain by just introducing massive uncertainty.
So how does the doctrine advise forces to actually survive and mitigate these threats? It sounds like we have to completely rethink how supply nodes operate.
Yeah, the core of the mitigation strategy is what's called the dispersion imperative. Concentrated static assets. They are just easy targets for enemy forces to detect and destroy. So, sustainment forces must be prepared to operate dispersed. Then, quickly mass when absolutely necessary to conduct critical sustainment activities, and then rapidly disperse again to increase survivability. Constant dispersion is basically used as a form of deception, and it creates these impossible targeting dilemmas for the adversary.
Okay, dispersion sounds great for survivability, but doesn't it fundamentally undermine the efficiency that logistics is typically based on? I mean, how do logisticians actually manage asset visibility or that crucial reception, staging, onward movement, and integration RSOI when they're intentionally spread out and under constant cyber attack?
That is the central paradox. And it's the reason for the big technological shift we're seeing. Logisticians simply have to accept reduced efficiency in exchange for increased survivability. There's no way around it. But to manage the inherent chaos of dispersion, the system has to become digitally dominant. The goal is to make the logistics network resilient enough to function even when parts of it are denied or degraded, which requires planning for risks against velocity and maintaining real-time asset visibility, knowing where your stuff and people are across multiple geographically dispersed nodes.
And this challenge starts right from home station, facing power projection challenges even before deployment.
Yes, absolutely. Peer adversaries will contest deployment every single step of the way, from port to port operations. So planning must incorporate using alternate and multiple lines of communication just to mitigate interdiction. And critically, forces have to establish specific cyber defenses for the systems and the associated data used to support movement. Because power projection from the home station is increasingly vulnerable to sophisticated cyber attack designed specifically to slow down that initial buildup of combat power in theater.
Okay, once forces arrive in theater, the theater army has the primary responsibility for reception, staging, onward movement, and integration, or RSOI, for all joint land forces.
Correct. And in a contested environment, the challenge to RSOI is maintaining the velocity of that flow while constantly managing risk. The theater army has to plan for contingencies where major seaports or airfields might be denied, forcing the use of smaller, maybe less efficient nodes. This makes maintaining asset visibility and ensuring the rapid movement of personnel and equipment absolutely critical. You have to prevent bottlenecks that an adversary can easily exploit.
This intense dependence on dispersion, speed, and visibility seems to demand new technological solutions, which leads us to the future concepts the doctrine talks about: precision and predictive logistics.
Right. Precision sustainment is really the desired outcome here. It's the effective delivery of the right capabilities in the right quantity at the precise point of employment when they are needed. This is what enables freedom of action, extends operational reach, and prolongs endurance by optimizing resources and eliminating waste that would otherwise just be vulnerable to targeting.
And what enables that level of precision? How do you achieve that?
Predictive logistics is the enabling system. That's the how. This means integrating sensors, communications, data applications, all to enable quicker and more accurate sustainment decision-making. At all echelons, from the tactical right up to the strategic, this kind of continuous assessment allows logisticians to develop running estimates that include not just, say, quantity on hand, but quantity consumed and, crucially, expected consumption, using advanced data models and prediction.
So the goal is essentially to use data automation and prediction to anticipate requirements before they become critical and adjust plans proactively. Managing that massive flood of sustainment data that flows all the way from the point of need back to the defense industrial base.
Absolutely. That's the vision. The ultimate aim is to gain efficiencies in things like decision dominance, autonomous distribution, maybe drones or unmanned vehicles, demand reduction, advanced power management. Data automation and prediction are seen as crucial for managing the whole system under the stress of contested operations, allowing those dispersed forces to still be supported effectively without having to congregate in large vulnerable supply nodes. Hashtag tag outro.
Well, this deep dive has really shown us the immense sort of dual-layered challenge facing U.S. national security today. On one hand, the United States is investing billions, literally billions, in modernizing the entire defense industrial base, the factories, the supply chains, the workforce, all to ensure strategic endurance at the national level.
And yet, simultaneously, the tactical logistics forces are having to prepare to survive and operate in a digitally vulnerable, highly contested operational environment. An environment that demands dispersal, speed, and resilience above almost everything else. It's a massive whole-of-nation transformation that's underway.
We've seen that the challenge isn't just about winning the fight anymore. It's also about surviving the supply chain to enable that fight. And the ultimate success of this entire complex system, it seems, rests very heavily on the human element.
It absolutely does. You know, the most critical link in this entire chain isn't necessarily a physical depot or a secure contract. It's the leaders. Leaders at all echelons who have to synthesize operational art and science. They have to be experts in executing logistics in these incredibly difficult, contested environments. Knowing exactly when to accept risk to maintain the offensive tempo, to ensure the mission succeeds, even when the entire system is under attack.
That is a demanding strategic imperative indeed. Perhaps the ultimate test for this revitalized defense industrial base isn't just its speed or scale, but whether its output can actually survive the adversary's attempts to target the most important piece of equipment on the modern battlefield, the network itself.
That's a profound point to end on. Thanks for walking us through this incredibly essential, complex topic today.
And we encourage you, the listener, to reflect on that immense strategic challenge, maintaining that bridge between the economy of the nation and the tactical operations of its own combat forces, especially in an environment where that bridge is constantly under fire, both physically and digitally. We'll see you next time for another deep dive.